Today we're going to talk about another ship that is no longer in the game, the Tier VIII Russian battleship Navarin, which, like the Marceau we talked about yesterday and the Druid we talked about last week, was available for rental early on in the September 2024 update. It no longer is, it's been removed from my port, and of course I can't look at the stats page because of that. So we cannot run down the stats on this one either. I just want to talk a little bit about how it plays, I suppose, and what I think of the ship, because it's an interesting thing. This is the first secondary Russian battleship to ever be introduced in the game. Most of the secondaries are in casemates along the side of the ship. You can sort of see them here from this angle. There's three in the back, there's a number of them in the middle, and a few in the front. This thing is loaded with secondaries. You can fully build into them if you'd like. I'm using Kedrov as the commander with Porcupine as one of the active skills and Hipper as one of the inspirations. The other inspiration is Kondo, though, so I think I only achieve a range of 10.2 or 10.4 with these secondaries. If you wanted to substitute out Kondo for somebody like Karuna, I've tried that, and the result was 11-kilometer range on the secondaries. Both of them, I'd say, are good ranges, and we'll see the secondaries in action during this match. Another interesting thing about the ship is that the two turrets on the rear are 360 degrees. The front one is not, but if you're pushing forward, you can rotate your firepower from one side of the ship to the other quite easily. And that's useful because obviously this ship is designed to be a brawler. Now, there is a couple of perhaps downsides that I can think of right off the top of my head. We're looking at 12 guns here, set in 4 triple turrets for the main battery. Obviously, one on the front, 2 on the back. These are 406 or 16-inch guns, but with the number being 12, the reload time on the main battery, as you could see there, is quite long. It's about 34 seconds. It's a bit longer than other ships at this tier with the same number of guns, and I don't think these guns are especially accurate or anything like that. They might have the unique Soviet characteristics where the dispersion is better at closer range, but I honestly can't tell, and since the ship is gone, no further testing is going to be achievable here, at least not for the moment. I assume eventually it'll come back. There's only two things that I really didn't enjoy about this ship. One is the top speed, which feels rather pedestrian. I want to say it can achieve something like 27 knots, and that in and of itself sounds fine. But, of course, in a brawling battleship like this, one where you want to get the secondaries on target, it does involve a lot of maneuvering, and all ships like to lose speed in a turn. Feels like effectively you're going around at about 20 knots in this thing. The top speed might actually be something more like 25. And I don't really like that. Not for a brawling battleship that's meant to get in there, get up close and personal, and use the secondaries. I'd like a little bit more speed, but I assume the reason we don't have it is because this is some sort of obsolete World War I design hull. It looks a lot to me, or it resembles at least, the German battle cruiser line. It really does look like a World War I hull that I guess has been modernized somewhat in order to make it fit in at the higher tiers. The big problem with the hull is the casemates. The casemates on the front and the back are replete with a lot of flat surfaces, which means they're shell catchers. I've had instances where I've taken an awful lot of damage well angled just because the enemy battleship shells managed to find a flat surface in or around the casemate secondaries, penetrated, and did full damage. That's another problem that you face in things like the Karl Johann, for example, that we just saw go down, or the German battle cruiser line. I think that's part of the reason that sometimes that line, even though it does have good side armor that can protect it from battleship firepower, sometimes it feels like it takes an awful lot of damage, and I'm going to chalk that up to the shell catchers. The same thing is true here. Although you do get the secondaries and you get these main battery guns. No torpedoes. You do get the limited DCPs like the rest of the Russian battleships do. You get a couple heals, and then you get the secondary reload booster. So I think much like the German battle cruisers, the playstyle here is pretty similar. What we've done in the beginning of this game is we've pushed in. We've gone up against the Marco Polo, who has just now gone down. And because there was an enemy destroyer, a Z-44, hanging around there with access to our broadside, we've retreated a little bit, and now we're going to turn back around and continue pushing in. We get a decent hit there on the Z-44 with the main battery guns, and it looks like our destroyer teammate, who is pursuing that enemy, is well on his way to sending the Z-44 back to port. And the Z-44 is really the only ship left alive out here on this flank. The blue team has sort of given up the opposite flank on the map, and we are behind in terms of kills. The enemy team has sunk 3 ships, 2 battleships and a cruiser, whereas we've only sunk 2 battleships and add a destroyer on top of that. The Z-44 goes down. We still have all of our destroyers left alive. And spoiler alert, these guys, especially the friendly Shimakaze, which is something that I probably don't often say, are going to come in clutch for the result of this battle. In this next sequence, we'll be able to see just how effective or perhaps ineffective having all this armor is. I suppose that's one thing I should mention about the hull, even though it does somewhat resemble a German battle cruiser. We all know that those things have icebreakers on the bows, but the upper bow plating and the stern plating are overmatchable by most battleships at the tier. I think the German battle cruiser line, by and large, has something like 25 or 26 millimeter plating on the bow and stern. That's not a problem for the Navarin. It gets 32 millimeter plating, much like the Karl Johann. And so you don't have to worry about being overmatched through the bow or the stern by anything except Yamato or Musashi, which is something that pretty much every battleship in the game at these higher tiers, aside from those with substandard armor plating on the bow and stern, can say. So it's not like that's too much of an advantage. I suppose that makes it a little bit easier against the likes of Colombo, for example, or anything with smaller than 460 millimeter guns, which is practically everything. There's a destroyer in our cap. The secondaries are opening fire. I would say these secondaries are honestly pretty good. They do seem to light a lot of fires. They're fairly accurate. I don't think they have the same characteristics as the German battlecruiser Schlieffen secondaries, but they can get the job done, and so can the main guns when they're on target. That Ibuki out there goes down for our first kill of the game, and we're up to 61,000 damage done. But of course, this is a true dedicated brawler, a true dedicated secondary brawler, and the lion's share of our damage is going to come from this sequence as we're pushing into the Vermont. I think in retrospect, this was not an ideal scenario to find myself in, but it does offer some good evidence for testing the efficacy of the secondaries. You can see they're hitting the Vermont, they're causing some damage. Of course, this ship does suffer from the same problem as a lot of the other Soviet battleships, which is weak turrets. When you're in close range like this, I found that these turrets are pretty easy to take out. In fact, the front turret, which the Vermont just generously disabled temporarily for us, I've had that thing permanently taken out in a couple of battles, which is not especially fun. I wouldn't say the firing angles to get all 3 of the turrets on target are awful, but in order to get the rear 2 turrets on target, you do have to give a fair amount of broadside, which we're forced to do here against the GK. Only the rear turrets are loaded and actually on target. We've got torpedoes in, we've got a GK, we've got a Vermont, and we've got 2 other ships in front of us. So we're about to go down. We're going to take the Vermont with us by using a ram. I know everybody hates the ram, but I think in that situation, it was about the best thing we could do. I don't think we should have pushed in against 3 separate enemy battleships. Doesn't matter what you are. You could be Russian. You could be, in fact, the Lenin at Tier 7 with some of the best armor in the game. And if you push into 3 battleships like this, right at close range, especially if some of them have angles on your side like that GK did, well, you're not going to be lasting very long. But we do finish the game with 183,000 damage. Granted, some of that is inflated because of the RAM, but prior to the RAM, I think we were up to about 120k. Got a lot of work from the secondaries, 221 hits with 6 fires. So obviously they fire pretty quickly. They do light fires, they do damage. I think they're useful in terms of acquiring sort of extra damage to go in tandem with the main battery guns. And if that had been a 1v1 versus the Vermont, we probably would have come out on top. I would say this is a pretty effective brawler, and it can be fun to play for that reason, because of course pushing in and being able to brawl is fun, even if the game is not always set up very well for achieving that kind of play style. In any case, there's one battleship left and one destroyer. And luckily for our team, we've got these 2 destroyers left. One of them is Shimakaze. The other, I think, might also be a Shimakaze, and they're going to come in clutch. One of them is going to be sinking the battleship. There he goes. That was Shimakaze over there in the middle of the map. He gets a Kraken unleashed for it. I'd say he's probably the one that really carried things for us. GG to him. This other Shimakaze is demonstrating that he has the ability to look at the mini-map, which is a rare enough thing for Shimakazes. He torpedoed the gap where the enemy destroyer was last spotted. He was shooting his main battery guns, I think, in an attempt to get that guy to shoot back at him. It was successful. The Z-52, which is what I think that is, reveals himself, and he's on full health. A little bit of a problem for our friendly Shimakaze, who doesn't have a lot of his own health to speak of. And the Z-52 is a much more effective gunboat than Shimakaze is, so I don't expect him to come out of this engagement on top. But all he's really doing is sitting inside of the enemy cap and stopping them from accruing points, which is all he really needs to do. The enemy Z-52's torpedoes do come in and take out that Shimakaze, but our hero, with the Kraken Unleashed over here, is well on this Z-52's case. He's going to launch some torpedoes of his own into that gap, hoping to maybe catch the Z-52, but spoiler alert, he doesn't. The battle ends with our victory. I don't think that Z-52 is ever found, and we actually finish with more base XP than the Kraken-achieving Shimakaze, who I think really is responsible for our win here more than I am. So GG to that guy. Navarin is certainly an interesting ship. Hopefully when it comes back to the game, it's a GXP ship or something easily obtainable, maybe even a campaign reward. I'll be interested to play it more extensively when and if it does ever return. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.